Well, I'm very happy to say I'm back with Neall Ellis, probably the most famous helicopter pilot in the world right now. But I need to explain to him. I'm a bit pissed off with him because I've taken a huge amount of flack from people who said you get this guy in an interview and you let him gloss over these momentous events as almost as if they were just incidental. So I've got him back, and Neall, thank you very much. First, let me just say thanks again for your time.
Pleasure. And look, I was always in the right place at the right time, so I would be looked after by my angels. So,
no, Neall. Well, look, I'm afraid we've got to go back to Op Super, and I need some more detail from you, please, on the background, how the operation unfolded, and what you recall of the events after your arrival at the scene. If we could just go through that one again, Neall, I'd be very grateful.
No problem. Okay, as I mentioned the first time, the op was that our intelligence people had received information that SWAPA wanted to open up a new front on the western part of the Kaika Fault, coming through the desert area, then moving south to wherever they wanted to go, Grootfontein, Windhoek, or whatever. Of course, that would spread our resources quite extensively. So on the 8th, let me just have a look at my notes here quickly. Excuse my glasses as well. I'm getting old. On the 8th.
On the 8th of?
8th of June.
What year? 82?
Yeah, 8th of March, 82.
Yeah, okay.
At that stage, I was permanently on Dongo with my family, with my wife and all that. We were based there. So it was easy for me to choose all the best trips. Now, we were called in to give a briefing that we were going to go and give support to a recce team out and be based in the Marienfluss. There'd be a small team. Can't remember how many. I think it was about eight guys. And then, of course, we would be based at the TAC headquarters with 2 Alouettes. My wingman was Angela Maranta. I was with Steve Pitzier. And Angela Maranta's wingman, fighting individual, was Eugene van der Merwe. Then on the Pumas side, we had Paula Krier, who's unfortunately dead. I can't really remember the other guy. Anyway, we deployed there on the day of the 8th, thinking we're just going to go and sit there, have braais, drink beer and stuff like that, and just chill out in the Marienfluss. Now, the Marienfluss is a stretch of, it's like a canyon or a valley. That's actually a valley, right in the western part of the Kaika Veld. And it's beautiful there. It's desert, it's got elephants, it's got antelope, sable antelope. It's really beautiful. And I'd seen that, as I mentioned before, I'd seen that a couple of years ago when it was grass high. Anyway, after taking off from Mondongo, we got to the Marienfluss and found it was just desert. Absolutely desert, or just desert. And all that indicated the runway was a windsock, a dilapidated windsock, surrounded by some 44-gallon drums. And then there was a path of rocks showing us the runway itself. And then there was 3 tents, one for the TAC HQ, one for the storeroom, and then 4 tents, one for the Alouette Pirate crews, and then another one for the Puma crews. We were there. The recce commander was Fossi. They'd actually flown in. They'd driven in by vehicle. And then the team commander, recce team commander was Jose Dennison, if I remember correctly. Anyway, so we got there on the 8th, late afternoon, the 8th. That night we had a couple of beers, had some, we brought some meat and just got to know each other better. The next day on the 9th, we sat around briefing on frequencies, movements, RVs in case a helicopter went down, RV in case the recce team hit contact, where we would go and pick them up. And we were going to redeploy them on that evening before last flight on the 9th of March, which is quite nice. It's, everybody was quite chill, quite relaxed, because we did not believe that our intelligence guys had picked up anything. Obviously, where there's smoke, there's fire, but we thought maybe it's just a rumor. So that night, we got back to base after dropping off the recce's in the area they wanted to be. And that's just north of Iona in the Kaika Veld, is just in the bottom part of Angola is a town called Iona. Now, we dropped the recce's maybe about 20 kilometers to the northwest of Iona on a road that sort of went up north to wherever the nearest Angolan town was. And while we were just sort of sitting there drinking a couple of beers and finishing off the drive, we heard an explosion in the distance, and it was a landmine explosion. And you can tell a landmine explosion from miles away. Anyway, we heard that explosion, and we thought, okay, now there's something there. The recce team had obviously moved away from where they put the landmine. They'd actually put 2 landmines down in the road, and then one had been detonated by a Mercedes truck, which they'd seen actually coming down. So we went to bed thinking everything's all right. We woke up the next morning waiting to hear a report. Jose said, no, there's nothing. So I'll pull it clear. Our Puma commander, he decided it's time to go down to the beach to go and get some mussels to supplement our diet, and if possible, fat, some fish. And that was about maybe an hour's flying there and an hour's flying back. So all the air crews we load ourselves into the back of one of the Pumas, and we set sail for the Canary mouth. And we had to swim in the sea, got some mussels, and time to come home. Anyway, on the way home, I was sitting in the back of the Puma, and our Paula says, come to the front. And he gives me a set of headsets. And he says, the guys have picked up enemy. They expecting a contact. They're trying to talk their way out of it, but we should be in the area. Anyway, we obviously can only go fast as possible in a Puma. When we got there, we had a quick briefing from Fossi on what the situation was. And that sort of thing, because most of our planning had been done before the time. So it's just a question of getting into the helicopters and going. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we took off. The 2 Alouettes took off. We took off first, and the Pumas delayed a couple of minutes as they normally did. And we got to the area, and it was quite easy to see where the contact was, because already the guys were in contact. Mortars were falling, and you could see the bush burning. So it was easy to find them. Now, what had happened is Jose had got onto the top of a small little kopje, and there they were set up a defensive position. And then the swappa guys were sort of moving in on them, sort of creeping up the hill. Obviously, they're having a bit of a fight. So when I got to the area, I realized, okay, now this is it. Now we're going to have a fight. But there was only, 21 swappa. We had about 16 guys. 12 guys is a sweep line. That's all we had. There were 2 Pumas, 16, 8 and 8. That's right. So because it wasn't a big area, because we didn't have a lot of guys on the ground, I let the Pumas orbit just to see which way these swappa guys would bombshell. And the only way to get them to bombshell was to start shooting at them and then determine what's going to happen. Because they were sort of caught in a bit of a rock and a hard place. On the top of the hill was Jose and his guys, and then of course we were behind him. So I shot behind him, got to determine the direction of breakout of the escape they're going to move. It's a flat area. If it was a hilly area, they'd go down the gullies and stuff like that. Because it's a flat desert area, once we got an idea where they're going, then I dropped the sweep line, and then we started killing them. In the end, on that contact area, I ended up on the hill because I'd run out of fuel. The Pumas had to go back and get fuel drums for us, and from the TAC HQ. So when we ran out of fuel, I landed on top of the hill where Jose and his people were, and of course I could conduct the firefight from the hill. But already the 3 guys were in contact, and it was an open area, so they didn't need much in the terms of sweep line control. The guys were fighting, but we could see the whole thing from the hill, which is quite nice. Then once it was finished, we got it was 14 dead and 7 captures. Sure. So then we took the 7 captures back to our TAC HQ, where not me, of course, where Fossi and those guys and his guys started interrogating the guys. By the way, just before I carry on, the ground commander for the 3-2 battalions troops that we were working with 3-2, was Jan Hogart. More of that later. We also got an Honoris Crux set for them. Anyway, so they did interrogation of the prisoners and stuff, and sort of got an idea of where the camp was. So now we determined the camp was maybe 300 to 350 people strong. They had a lot of weapons. We were told SAM-7s. They mentioned heavy machine guns. So immediately I thought, well, it's 12-7s. It's 14-5, which is pretty normal for that. But they also had a lot of equipment, landmines, RPGs. Man, they had a hell of a lot of stuff, as we found out later. So after interrogation, we got ready to do an attack the next day. But now we were hopelessly outnumbered. We had, 16 3-2 guys as, sort of support, 2 Alouettes and 2 Pumas. So then it was a question of getting reinforcements in. So during that morning, I must admit the guys, we got another 3 Pumas, which gave us a total of 5 Pumas, and then 2 Alouettes, another 2 Alouettes. So we were 4 gunships and 5 Pumas. But now we had a fuel and ammunition problem. So the guys flew in a C-130 or a C-160, one of a C-130 from Pretoria, laden with fuel drums, and did an airdrop at the airstrip where we were, which is quite a feat when you think that, you know, we picked up the guys the day before, the nighttime where decisions made, and by lunchtime, that C-130 was overhead dropping fuel. So it's about a 3-hour flight, 3.5-hour flight from Pretoria up to where we were. So the organization was good. Anyway, that afternoon, we did the planning and all that sort of stuff, so not much happened. There was a plan to do the attack that afternoon, that's right. But I wasn't happy about that because the guys didn't realize we're going to attack camp of 300 plus people. And you can't go and attack a camp of that size late in the afternoon because, you know, there's just not enough time. You know, you've got to do it slowly, otherwise you lose people. Anyway, headquarters said, we will attack. We were ready. We had the extra troops on the ground. We did our briefings. And around about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, we set sail for the camp. But fortunately, a thunderstorm developed. So we couldn't actually go and attack the camp as such, which in some ways was a disappointment because we thought, you know, the guys are now aware of our position. They would have heard the choppers. And then secondly, you know, they would escape. So, but then also on the other side, on the positive note, there would never have been enough time to attack that time. So we would return to base. And then we had a guy, an intelligence officer called Henk Kutsia. Now, Henk Kutsia was a mountain of a man, big guy, really big guy, big shoes, big hands, sort of, I wouldn't say broken teeth, but he looked a rough and tough and rugged guy, the type of guy that you don't want to meet in the back end. Anyway, Henk interrogated these prisoners. And now there's this massive guy interrogating these guys, and he's speaking softly. He doesn't shout at them. He's speaking softly. He never hit them. All he did, he sat close to the guards, so it's within his sort of personal space. And all he did, he just put his foot, the one foot with his boot on it, on the other guy's foot, just to let him know, we've got contacts. You and I now, we have contact. We are now going to communicate. And this is, and he just touched him, just put a little bit of pressure. So you can see the guy's a bit fearful. Anyway, they spilled the beans. Amazing what beans they spilled. Henk got them to build a sandbar of the camp area. So then we determined more or less a better idea where the camp was, which was good we had the break and we didn't attack the night before because the original position that we determined was about 20 kilometers away. So we would have destroyed, we would have missed everything and nothing would have worked out. Anyway, so now we had a good picture and it was now too late. Definitely was, you know, that night Henk was interrogating him. We had briefing at that night, we replanned, and the next morning was time for attack. So we got up early, and according to the prisoners, the best time the swappa guys had an attack, they had a parade. Every morning at 8 o'clock, there was a parade ground where they all stood in a parade, which that'll be the best time to attack. Everybody's together, and if we were lucky, we'd catch them on the parade ground, and then, you know, time would go quickly. We took off. Letting the Pumas, we let the Pumas stay behind for 10, 15 minutes so that we could get to the area, determine the actual position on the camp because we didn't have any aerial photographs or anything like that. Anyway, we got there and it was around about 8 o'clock we got overhead. Now, the other reason why I didn't like, because initially the headquarters wanted a first light attack. I said no, because of the shadows. This is something I learned from the Rhodesian Air Force, Rhodesian Fire Force operation. Attacking like a terrorist camp early in the morning is not the greatest idea because of the shadows. The guys can hide in the shadows, you can't pick them up. So wait for the sun to come up, which I managed to convince the guys we could do. So the sun came up, and then we, as I said, we got overhead, and we couldn't find the camp at all. We knew we were the area, but could see nothing. It was still a bit of shadows because of the mountains and the shadows in the area. Yeah, then we started picking up, you know, then Steve, looking at all I could see was like dew-covered rocks. And it wasn't a particularly dense bush area, but there was a lot of rocks, brown rocks, and I was looking for these brown rocks. And then Steve says, those aren't rocks, those are tents. And then I sort of focused down there, and then I just saw all these rocks became tents. And then the camp path pattern suddenly came out. You know, you could pick up the camp path pattern. And then you look closer, underneath all the bushes next to the tents, there was feet, legs sticking out. It's like the one bush is like a starfish. There were about five or six guys had their heads all under the one bush, hoping they conceal themselves, but from the waist downwards, their legs are sticking out. So we said, okay, fine, we got it. So he said, we've got the guys, and now the Pumas can come and start dropping in. We knew exactly where the camp was, and now we could start planning to put down the stopper groups. Now, the terrorists hadn't started moving by then. So we just sort of nonchalantly flew around, looking down, don't look at us, we won't look at you, ignore us, maybe we'll go away, type thing. And then after about 5 or 10 minutes, just certainly this camp, you could see the guys starting to get a bit edgy and some of them started crawling towards the edge of the camp. Now, from previous knowledge, if you see one guy moving, the rest follow like lemmings. So when we let him go, then we started seeing where the trend of the breakout was going, where the movement was going, so we put a stopper in that direction. And then it became a bit outside the side. That's time to start opening up fire. And I put a couple of rounds on the first guy breaking out, and then everything just broke loose. The next thing, Sam ran past my nose. Old Angelo shouted out, there's a Sam 7 mile coming from where, at 9 o'clock or something. And but that's okay. It didn't worry me because Sam shot at me before, and I knew they weren't going to hit the aircraft. But we always get that bit of a sort of gut feeling, not gut feeling, but that the nausea feeling your stomach when shit.
How do you know it's not going to hit you?
Because our CSIR had developed a system to prevent that.
Okay.
Yeah, they were very good about it. We had this Swello mod, which is a shard over the engine. We had anti-infrared paint. And then, of course, the exhaust gases were reflected up into the rotor wash. Anyway, so the first SAM came. The next thing I saw another SAM going towards Angelo that passed his nose. And then the fight was on. Then we got all the rest of the Pumas in. And then it was in earnest. Those guys, 300 guys shooting AKs and RPGs and SAMs. And fortunately, there weren't any 14.5s because I think if there were 14.5, we would have had a big problem. Luckily, they weren't. And then we just carried on fighting. It took the whole day. There was some of the fighting was pretty close. One of the call signs, in fact, is a good friend of mine, Blackie Swart. He was a lieutenant, 3-2, and he was a lieutenant, he was a platoon commander, 3-2. And he was dropped off by the Pumas, and as soon as he got dropped off, he was in contact because that time the swappa were running out. And I would stop a group after the Puma took a bit longer than I expected, and the swappa we were running fast, and I thought, and the Puma, when I dropped the Puma off, they must have been about not even 100 meters apart. So the 3-2 guys got out the helicopter took off, and then it happened. There was another occasion as well that Blackie was in immediate contact. In fact, he was pinned down. And Blackie, even today, jokes that I nearly tried to kill him. I tried to kill him in that contact. But what happened? He got pinned down. And obviously, his call sign opened fire. And we in the gunship, we were shooting at the swapper, but they were shooting at Blackie because they wanted to get away. And then I think they were maybe 5 meters apart between the swapper and Blackie. I mean, it's close. It was really close. And he couldn't move. And so he was pinned down. So I said to Steve, I said, okay, you've got to shoot. You've got to shoot the swapper. And Steve said, I can't. I'm going to kill the 3-2 guy. And I said, look, either you kill him or the swapper kill him. So let's control this a little bit better. So I orbited around behind Blackie, and I said to Steve, shoot. Steve was an accurate gunner. I mean, he would really shoot that 20mm cannon. I said, shoot so that the shrapnel explodes just in front of Blackie's call sign, because the shrapnel would move, in the direction of the guys on the ground. So he did, and he took out that whole swapper element, and now Blackie could move on further. Another occasion, another sweep line. They dropped some guys on, and I remember dropping off the Puma, same thing, the swapper coming down the gully. Man, when that Puma was taking off on the ground, they were 50 meters apart. So there was no playing around. The guys contact, and it was fierce. It was a really fierce fight that day. But we won with some of the lighter moments. After a while, you've got to have a piss. Sometimes you've got to get out there. You can't sit there for 2.5, 3 hours, without, after breakfast, having lots of drinks and stuff like that. So I landed close to where Jan Hogarth's position was, just to find out You know, how does he see things on the ground? Because the fighting had started to die down. You know, it was just a question of, there were a couple, you know, the main fight had stopped, but then the guys, the little elements of swappa that needed to be tidied up. So I went in at a land to have a piss. And while I'm standing there chatting to the guys having a piss, one of the troops shouted, "Whoa, you know, watch out, get down." And I put a piss, you know, me, Neil Ellis, what I was usually talking to. Next thing was there's an RPG exploding in the tree above me. The guy tried to shoot me with an RPG. And of course I pissed myself, literally. So quickly get on the helicopter and get back in the air, where it's a lot safer than on the ground. Another occasion, you know, because at the one stage when the fighting was fairly fierce, we called in the Impalas to come and give us some close-in support on a particularly stubborn swappa element on the ground. That we're giving the 3-2 guys a bit of a hassle. And so I eased off, we sort of eased off the gunships, we sort of widened our war orbit to bring in these Impalas. And after about 5 or 10 minutes, there's no Impalas. So I call the Impala to the formation and say, "Listen, where are you? You know, you can come in, you're welcome." He says, "No, we're orbiting the area, we're orbiting the contact area, but you know, we can't see you." And I said, "Where are you?" And he gave me some place. And I said, "But you must be in the wrong valley." He says, "No, we're in the right valley." And I said, "But I'm at the contact. How can I be in the wrong valley if we're fighting a war?" You know, it was crazy. Anyway, the junior space club. But in the end, I think that day we had 187 dead.
Wow.
One got away. I think we got a couple of captures too.
And own casualties?
So I remember correctly, it was 2 or 3 dead, a couple of wounded. But you know, it was small. We had 45 guys on the ground. There was about 45, 48 guys on the ground. That's including a mortar team. So the actual fighting element was just over 40. And there was 350, you know, terrorists. So it really was, you know, the odds were heavily in their favor. But once again, it shows how effective a fire force can be. You know, if you've got helicopter gunships, helicopter troopers, and you've got some well-trained troops, that lightly armed troops that can do this, you know, it's just a given. You will win the war. It's crazy. I mean, we attacked once a camp of 600 with, I think we had about 120 people, but we won against, you know, 120 against 600. The odds are amazing, but we still won. But then we had the helicopter gunships.
Neil, how did you rate swappa? It seems like they gave a good account of themselves on many occasions during that war. You know,
there were some very good swappa elements. There was one of the commanders, if I remember correctly, his name was Bulawayo. And he was a very astute commander. For example, I remember one time we were attacked a position we were supposed to be swappa, and this is some other time, you know, more towards the east. And the choppers actually came and we dropped off troops, and he said to his guys, "Don't open fire." And the choppers actually flew right over his positions on short finals to drop off the troops. They didn't open fire, and they moved away. And he caused a lot of trouble, you know, before our forces, the SANDF and 3-2 battalion. He was really a good commander. So yes, there were some very good swappa commanders. But then on the other hand, I suppose, you know, I would say they weren't good. But then I'm flying an Alouette gunship, you know, so the odds are definitely on my side. They did a lot of ambushes. You know, we have a look at some of the battles we had, some of the contacts. In a sense, they did account for themselves very well. Yeah.
Neil, just talk a little bit about the difference between Rhodesia and Southwest Africa in terms of fighting a counterinsurgency war. What struck you as the big differences?
You see my T-shirt: beer, cards, women, and choppers. You're a bit flippant again.
Yeah.
Look, I liked Rhodesia because Rhodesia to me was, in a sense, the guys were more experienced in fighting a counterinsurgency warfare, particularly at the beginning. The Rhodesians were much more open. After that, you know, after the different, the police, the special branch, the RLI, the RIR, and the Air Force, and whoever got together, like the joint joint forces, a joint operations sense of jobs. Once everybody started talking to each other, things worked. The planning was better. The radio comms were better. But then another thing which was in the Rhodesians' favor was a relatively small area compared to Southwest Africa and Angola.
Right.
Although and on the other hand, the South SANDF, we had the resources. I mean, the Rhodesians had the jets and stuff like that, but we had Mirages, we had Canberras, we had heavy transport aircraft, plus we had a lot of Alouettes and we had a lot of Pumas, plus Freebombs. So we had a lot more equipment. But the Rhodesians' military was much more open to suggestions and were much more open to try out different ideas.
Yeah.
Because they were permanent. Most of the soldiers were permanent apart from the territorial forces. But like the RAR, the RLI, the guys doing most of the fighting were permanent forces. And so were the commanders. Now that's important. Now in the sort of South African scenario, a lot of the commanders were not permanent. For example, we would go on an operation and we'd be using a 3-2 battalion troops, which are permanent, but then we'd have BATs, and BATs were national servicemen, although some of the commanders were a permanent force.
Right.
Then the other units were territorial, but 3-2 were mainly, they were all permanent guys. So you could interact with them and they can talk to them, and the guys were there over a period and they learned by experience. But when we went on to a bigger operation, like the command of the operation, the overall commander, and I'm not talking about company commanders or that sort of thing, I'm talking about the overall commander, he would be a guy that had just come off a staff course, like a colonel, normally a colonel, and to become promoted to a brigadier, he had to have spend a tour in Southwest Africa. So he would come up for 3 months, and then he'd come up with all these conventional war ideas and he'd tell us what to do and what to do. And we say, no, we can't operate like that. And he says, I'm a commander. He says, okay. And of course, I'm not saying it was always a failure, but generally speaking, it turned out to be a failure until he started listening to the guys on the ground. And then things were tough. So in that sense, Rhodesia was much better. And towards the end, our SADF commanders, we got our act together. I think we were quite successful. We mentioned the big operation, Wajalahupa, when we were fighting the Cubans and the FAPA. I mean, that was a big operation. We did very well because the commanders had started to learn. But then that was more conventional. That wasn't an unconventional war.
Yeah, well, it's interesting, Neil. I think I've mentioned this before, but if you read this book, Hanging by a Thread, I think it is by Irina Filatova, it's very interesting the fact that battle on the Lomba, really, when the South Africans gave such a strong account of themselves, was one of the pivotal events that triggered the downfall of the Soviet Union, because the Russian generals went back to Moscow and basically said to their political masters, these South Africans are not going to be beaten. We can't actually win this war. And this was after the Soviets and the Cubans, as you know, had thrown a lot of resources into that encounter. And when they came away without a victory, it was really quite a turning point, not only in the Angolan theater or Southern Africa, but on the world stage. Gorbachev had to get his head around the fact that they were never going to be an imperial power, and it was time to look at things differently.
Well, I agree, and you think of that, there was that, I talk under correction, but there was a Cuban general who was fated as a war hero, and when he got back to Cuba, he was executed.
Yes.
Because he wasn't successful. He couldn't win a battle.
Yes.
Yeah. I can't remember his name.
Yeah, that's right. That's quite right. Castro was furious with the fact that they hadn't managed to pull that off. Neil, I just want to ask you about Arthur Walker. I know little about him, but what a great guy. Did you work with him at all? Can you tell us a bit about his exploits?
Arthur was an amazing guy, really. I knew Arthur. Well, look, when I was giving this stuff, I was on instructor's course at the Noto when he came to choppers. Then after that, he went to Alouettes, and he was one of the first few guys that went to Rhodesia on a more permanent and a very sort of clandestine deployment, he was up there, and he did very well. Arthur was a fearless guy. He was quite fearless. You know, he's like some of us. We just thought we were invincible, nothing could touch us. But Arthur was very good. He, apart from being a good chopper pilot, he could lead the battle quite well. And Arthur and I developed a couple of really good procedures, if you want to call it. The one was the Kufit operations. Between the two of us, we developed a way of using Alouette gunships on the Kufit operations. 2 Alouettes circling, one going wide, one overhead the troops. The two of us developed the lunar ops with the night operations. And then, of course, you know, he got the double HC, double gold. So he's I'll talk on a correction, but he's the highest decorated officer or member of the SAAF that I know of. He got, as I say, got double HC.
Can you tell us just a little bit about what those medals were for, if you remember, Neil? Just a bit of the detail.
No, I haven't got the detail. One time, a helicopter went down, and he went to rescue the guy. Now, let me not go into this because I haven't got the detail. I apologize.
Just try. Just a little bit of what you remember.
Another one was Serge Bouvet. Serge Bouvet went down for some unknown reason, and Arthur went down to pick him up. And then when Arthur got out the aircraft, I think he had a bit of a contact with one of the terrorists, or his flight engineer had a contact. That came out a lot of fire. I can't say, no, really, it's slipped my mind.
Okay, Neil, just moving on, I just want to go, I want to jump quite a long way in terms of geography and time. And tell us about your time in Somalia, how you ended up there, what your tasks were, and just a bit about that particular part of your career.
In Somalia, the guys, there was, I can't remember the name of the company, but it was Lafras Latam, and some South Africans had a contract with the UAE to train Somali forces and conduct operations against Al-Shabaab. It was quite a big operation. I mean, they were going to be quite well kitted out. I never went on the first deployment, but then after I don't know for how many months, the guys that started off the operation, the contract was cancelled, and then what was a small holding group of admin personnel and trainers were left behind. I joined at that stage. Now, I was there with Rudolf van Heerden. He was our commander on the ground. There were a couple of other guys. There was about 2 or 3 admin guys. There was myself as an Alouette pilot. And then a flight engineer was there. And then we had a crew flying a King Air, and we had some Thrushes. The agriculture display aircraft. Now, they were going to be armed for operations against Al-Shabaab, but when I got there, they hadn't been armed, but we used them for reconnaissance purposes. The purpose mainly was to train up these guys, and hopefully it would start up to become an offensive operation again, where we could go deploy against Al-Shabaab. So I was there. We were living at a place called Basaso in a intense, pretty hot, but at least the tents were air conditioned. And in the end, we had to just I was there with my flight engineer, was a South African called Luke. Then I had an American as well called Mark. And there was another Alouette pilot that came up. Anyway, we did a rotation, 2 months in, 2 months out. And that was basically it. We didn't do much. We didn't do too much. We didn't do any fighting as such. I know previously Arthur was there. Those guys had a bit of fighting because they also was anti-piracy. There was one ship that was kidnapped. What do you call it? Hijacked by the pirates.
Yeah.
And then Rolf, he was a commander on the ground, and they managed to rescue the hostages and kill off the Al-Shabaab people. Now, Arthur was there. In fact, Arthur did quite a bit of shooting there as well. So he's been around. Then what we were doing, we ended up mainly doing money runs. Sometimes we went out on a op as such, to look for Al-Shabaab, and we found them, we would kill them, but I never killed any Al-Shabaab because somehow there was somebody in the camp passing on information. So I spent a lot of time just sort of getting back into spearfishing, kayaking and stuff like that. But I did a lot of recce as well on the Thrushes. That was nice to get back into fixed wing. And because it was a tail drag and I'd flown the hardest. So, you know, it was just a question of the guy, we had a dual seater thrush. So I took off on that and he gave me a couple of hours dual and then I was back in the reconnaissance. Otherwise, there wasn't too much happened. I mean, I did end up in a bomb blast, which is one of those things that happened.
Neil, just tell me your thoughts on the American intervention. It ended up in a something of a disaster. Do you have anything to say about that? Where did the Americans go wrong in Somalia, in Mogadishu?
With that Black Hawk Down issue.
Yeah.
It's difficult. You know, first of all, I don't think the Americans are that great when it comes to unconventional warfare, particularly fighting in Africa. I don't think they really know what they're doing. They're far too, okay, we're talking about years ago, not now with the high technology, but still, I just don't think they've got the expertise that we in South Africa have. I think they go in there thinking they're going to do, everybody's going to be scared.
Yeah.
And also, I don't think they understand how capable, you know, these guys on the ground are. Now, what happened there was, I just think it's just poor planning.
And they underestimated what they were up against.
Exactly. So they don't understand how good the guys are. They underestimate them. And you know, these guys, particularly up there in that part of the world, they've got a lot of experience. And you give one of those guys an AK, give him a bit of training, and there's enough on the ground. That AK is going to do damage. And you can't go flying over the town, low level, you know, shooting at people at slow speed. You will get shot. It doesn't matter how good you are or what ammo armament you got in that aircraft. I mean, you put in an M134 Dillon, which puts on a hell of a lot of firepower. And, you know, you can only point that weapon at one place. Then all around you, you've got all these other buggers shooting at you. So you will, and if you're slow, if you're not a moving target, if you're just sort of going around slowly, almost on a hover, you will get shot at. It's a given.
Neil, you spent a bit of time in the Congo as well. Just tell us about that. And do you remember when you were in the Congo?
It started off in Kinshasa. I was working with a friend of mine called Honoris. We went up there and got to get a contract through General Baramoto, who was some gendarmes or something, I'm not quite sure. He was close confidant to Maputo, President Maputo.
Okay.
Anyway, we went up there to give a contract and put in a force to go and help them fight Kabila. Everything went well until Baramoto fell out with Kabila. And then he was sort of exiled.
Fell out with Kabila or with Maputo?
Sorry, with Maputo.
Yeah, okay.
Fell out.
Okay.
And then things dragged on. Then we were talking to this guy and that guy, and we were putting in plans, waiting for money, and that sort of thing. Then I was up there for about 6 months. After about 6 months, and Kabila was really getting close to Kinshasa. You know, right in the beginning when Kabila was in the east, and we said, we must attack now. If we don't attack now, you will lose your country, because once they cross this river, that's the Sun River in the east, once they got to, then they're going to spread out. They can move north, south, and still come to not so much the central part of the country, because it's just dense forest. They could go down towards Lubumbashi and come around, which they did. And then after about 6 months, when Kabila was getting quite close, I was called in Kenya, and he called me and says, right, we've got a contract. And he gave me about $60,000 just to get people up to Kinshasa. And I got hold of Maritza, said, bring people. He brought me through some guys up. And he brought up 2 pilots. We had some ground staff, some guys on the ground. And then we got 2 pilots. One is a Frenchman called Jean-Jacques Fuentes, and then a South African, another helicopter pilot called Jules Joubert. Anyway, so after a bit, then Maputo had a couple of Mi-24s and some L-39s at his palace up there in the north.
Badalita.
Badalita. Yes,
yeah.
Badalita.
Yeah.
So we went there. And we were told that the airplanes are serviceable, fuel, ammunition. When we got there, it's in a mess. The L-39s were in a terrible mess. Jean-Jacques was going to be the jet pilot. Juba and I were going to fly the helicopters. And in the end, we managed to get one in the air, but it was a disaster. It was so full of vibrations. It really was dangerous to fly it. And then we said we need ammunition because there was no ammunition. Fuel was no problem, but ammunition was a problem. I mean, that's what we needed. And the guy said, oh, Mabutu's son said, no, hang on there, don't worry, we bring in ammunition. And we start thinking, they've got no ammunition. You know, to get a shipment of ammunition can take a month or two with all the others, you know, all the paperwork that needs to be done. EUCs, if you needed EUCs, no, so we said, okay, fine. So we waited. And then Kabila was getting closer. After a couple of days, you know, we were trying to get this aircraft together. Kabila was getting closer. So Mabutu's son came to us and said, we started saying, what's going to happen? He says, don't worry, we'll pay you. And we says, yeah, but Kabila's coming. How, you know, there's nowhere to go. He says, don't worry. When we leave, we'll take you with us. Yeah, well, yeah. So anyway, so now we were staying in General Baramuta's house. Beautiful place, you know, satin sheets, air conditioning, wall-sized TVs, a room stocked full of French champagne, French wines, and every night from the palace to get Mabutu's home, we get a lot of trolleys full of salmon, caviar, and you know, all that stuff that got flown in from France every day. They bring in an aeroplane of fresh food for Mabutu, and we shared in that. Anyway, so that after that day after we were told we're going to be picked up and flown out, we were lying in bed, and early in the morning I hear jets going, aircraft going off. And I woke the other guys up. I said, listen, all these airplanes are going. What's going on? Then we heard shooting. Then we realized, Mabutu's leaving, but he's forgotten about us. So we stayed. Then the guys came looking for us. And we had a bit of a firefight at the villa. And we managed to chase them away because they came with AKs, and we had AKs, M14s. And then they came back with a Jeep with a 12-7 on it, and then we decided to get stuck. So we ran out the back door and went and hid in a woman that was working for Baramuto in her house. But now the whole time we could hear the troops moving around. We got people saying, they're looking for you, they're looking for you. And you can see this woman's getting agitated. Because now if we find in her house, they will kill her because they wanted to kill us, so automatically kill her. And we're watching from the house, all these guys, you know, it's amazing. There's this fantastic house. It's a house that, you know, you dream of living in, luxurious, everything in it. And here the guys are carrying on their heads of fridges, they're carrying out bedding, they've ripped air conditioning out the rooms, they're carrying boxes of wine and champagne, then they're throwing a grenade in the room just to destroy it. All they had to do was just move into the house. Nobody would stop them. But they've got to destroy it and carry anything out. That's something today I'll never forget. You know, so then late that afternoon, the woman is out. She says, we've got to go. So we said, okay, let's go. So we develop a plan, we're going to walk out. Now, this is about 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, Jean-Jacques is a Frenchman who speaks French. We don't speak French. So we start walking. We get stopped by
heading for where? Do you know where you're going?
We decided to go to Central Africa Republic. We're going to walk into the Republic. It's about maybe 30 or 40 km away.
Okay.
So, but we didn't want to take weapons. Our guys was that we Air France pilots were here for a night stop. And now, you know, we can't get out because the runway is destroyed. Now we're walking. We're going to go to Central African Republic. We're not part of this war. You know, so, you know, Jean-Jacques talking on his flight bag, he's got Air France stickers and stuff like that. You know, we carry on walking. But now we get to the point where it started getting rough. Second time we got stopped when the guys were aggressive. They sort of stripped us. They took all our clothes off. I went through our clothes. I found, I think Jean-Jacques had put about $1,000 or $10,000 in shoes, and I found that. So, but also, luckily, he'd given me $200, which I stuck into a belt, which had a little concealed pouch in it. So they took his money. I had $2,000 or $3,000 in me. They took my money. And whatever, anything of value they took, like a watch and all that sort of stuff. And the same thing in Juba. Then they let us go. Then we get to the next roadblock, and then they beat us up. And each time we get beaten up with rifle butts and slapped around a bit. In the end, we go. Then we come to one last roadblock, because now we're just about on the outskirts of Papelit. Now, you know, your nerves are a bit jittery. We're through a bit. And every time you get stopped, you think these guys are going to kill you. So we stop at this one roadblock, and there's 3 guys, and they've got a bottle of whiskey in one hand, sipping from the whiskey, and a beer in the other. The one guy had a baboon on his shoulder called, what was it, Mary or Nancy or something. Anyway, he's talking to Nancy. While he's drinking, he's talking to Nancy and asking in French, what should he do with these white people? And of course, the man's going, and he says, we're going to kill him. All that. So now we're waiting. Anyway, after sort of beating us up a bit more, then, the whole time they've got their AKs on us. Then they say to Frenchman, Jean-Jacques, they say, okay, you can go, leave. So Jean-Jacques leave. And he says, you, SAAF to shoot mercenary. You start walking down the road. So we started walking about 20 meters away. We start shop, and we turn around, and there they've got their AKs at us, pointing. But they're sort of swaying from the alcohol. And the next thing we start shooting. Man, I'll tell you what, but the rounds are hitting the ground in front of us. And they're not one of us really hitting us. Juba got a bit of shrapnel on his legs. I just got a little bit of a cut from a stone or something. But then while the guys are shooting, there's some woman washing their clothes. They're doing some washing of clothes in the stream everywhere. And they started shouting at these soldiers. What are you doing, Tansi? Why? Going mad at soldiers. So the soldiers focused on the woman. So I said to Ojiba, I said, let's get it. And then Jean-Jacques, I don't know, he'd come around the bush with some guy, and he says, come. So we just ducked into the bush and ran off. So we got away from that. Then we were taken out at this stage. Now, I don't know about Juba, I'm sure he felt the same as me. We're in a bit of a state, psychologically, very messed up. So we get into this, Jean-Jacques is one of Baramuta's soldiers. So we get into a village, and there's Baramuta's soldiers. They know us, they recognize us. So we're sitting around there, and they give us some water and all that sort of stuff. The next moment, a Rwandan officer walks in. So they grab this Rwandan officer, and they start beating him. Now I'm witnessing a guy being beaten to death. Now I'm thinking, if they're beating this guy, not really, they were clubs and sticks and beating him. And then they end his life or something like that. And I was thinking, who's next? Then they said, don't worry, no problem, peace and all that sort of stuff. You can carry on. Anyway, we started walking out. But now it's nighttime. So we found a little place where we concealed ourselves in a bush. But the whole night you could hear these guys moving around. Afrika shoot mercenary, and then they're shooting and all that. And we said, no, we've got to get going. So before first light, we start walking to the Central Africa border. While we're walking there, all the sort of civilians that are also running around, refugees, they start saying, you guys, the soldiers are looking for you. You must hurry up because they're coming. So we quickened up our pace. We got stopped at another place where they beat us up again, and then they took everything. Even we had a sat phone, they took our sat phone. I don't know why the other guys didn't take the sat phone before, but now this time they took the sat phone. And we'd actually used the sat phone because Jean-Jacques, his brother worked in the French intelligence system. So, they said, just get to Central African Republic, get to a town across the river, and we'll be picked up by a helicopter. So now we had a plan. Anyway, we get on the way there in mid-morning, we come to a village, and the guys grab us. Jean-Jacques had this wearing what he calls French flying boots. Now, French flying boots to me look like Chelsea boots. But, listen, I don't even remember Chelsea boots from days gone by. And it's full of blisters. And I was mudding. How can you be walking around in Chelsea boots? Both Juba and I, proper hiking, which we normally do. So we watched the stream, and the guys come and grab us and interrogate us, beat us up some more. And then they start arguing over business cards.
Over what?
Business cards. I had a pack of business cards. They argued notebook. There was no money. There was nothing of value. Then they start haggling amongst themselves, sort of arguing amongst themselves, who's going to take the soup? And I said to Juba and Jean, let's go. So we ran off. We managed to grab an AK, so we ran off. Then we heard them coming after us, but we didn't stop. We got to the river, and there's a guy in a canoe. And we said to him, you want to lift down the river? He said, no. So I took out $100 and I showed it to him, pointed the AK at him, and we got into the boat. And then as we're getting the boat, all the guys chasing us broke out to the foliage. But then we'd gone down the river. Anyway, I just threw the AK overboard because we didn't want to be caught in Central African Republic with the AK. Later that afternoon, we got to the village we were supposed to be. And then the local officials and police took us in. They looked after us, gave us some food and beer, and we chilled out. We slept on the floor. And then we got a message from the gendarme commander that the helicopter's coming to pick us up. So we said, we're safe. Luckily, now it's fantastic. After an hour or two, Puma comes in. And now we think, good, we're going to be safe. Out come these burly white guys, French troops and all that. They grab us, they beat us up again, handcuff us up, and drag us to the helicopter and throw us into the helicopter, and off we go. The helicopter didn't even shut down. I think we've been beaten up for all these locals coming down this way. Now we're beaten up by people who are supposed to be our white people, supposed to be rescue us, but they beat us up as well. Anyway, we land for fuel at the place and we start talking. But then we found out they didn't know who we were. They were just told, go to this place, pick up 3 white guys. We don't know who they are, be careful. So that was their briefing. So they were careful, and they made sure they were very careful. Anyway, ended up in Bangui, and after that, we went back to South Africa. And that was the end of our Congo escapade.
What a story. Neil, did you know anything about the Zimbabwe pilots that got involved probably later than that? One guy flying a Hawk was shot down. These were white pilots. One of the Van Heerdens was shot down flying a helicopter, I think. They got into some quite serious action there.
In fact, let's go. Executive Outcomes also put a team out there. It's not very well known. In fact, Arthur Walker was part of that team. And Arthur Walker was flying an MI-24. And he ended up having an engine problem. And he had to land, and he got captured by, let's say, Mobutu's people. And he was actually locked up for the night. But Arthur was actually, he was fearless. He was locked up, and then he called them that he had no water. So he started calling them, and the guards came, and he actually started shouting at them and giving them orders. In the end, he had them standing at attention, and they released him. So that's Arthur Walker, and then he got rescued. Going back to the original question, I don't know who was shot down, but I know that Dave Atkinson, who was a SAAF pilot he was one of the original guys that went to Rhodesia as a clandestine deployment in 75, I think it was, 75. And he stayed on in Rhodesia for quite a while and went back. And when he went back, he was flying in DRC.
Flying choppers.
With the Zimbabwe. And he said it was rough. It was really rough. But they were flying elevates. Otherwise, the other guys I did a trip to Rhodesia, then Zimbabwe about 2 years ago, to stand in pilot on the Jet Ranger. And I was flying with one of the ex-Zimbabwean Air Force pilots. He was a good guy. And he was up there. And he said it was really heavy. It was quite, because they didn't have the support they wanted, they needed. And of course, they got shot at quite a bit. It was quite wild.
Yeah, it's a hell of a war there, which hasn't really been that well documented. But I've just heard bits and pieces about some of the incidents, and my word, it was quite a story.
Unfortunately, Dave Atkinson's dead now. And, he was an instructor after leaving the Zimbabwean Air Force. He went to Lesotho as one of the instructor on the Lesotho Air Force on the helicopters. And he told me a couple of stories. And I don't think that it wasn't organized. They didn't have a good time.
Neil, now on to Afghanistan. Tell us about your Afghanistan adventure.
That was good fun. Kabul was supposed to be in a country where there's, it's Sharia law and stuff like that. But I think at that time it wasn't that bad, although we weren't allowed to drink.
So just roughly, what year was it then when you were in Afghanistan? Was this after the Americans went in?
No, 2010, 2011.
Okay. Yeah.
Look, the main, there was sort of holding operations. I was flying for a company. I went up there for a company flying an MI8 Titan helicopters, who were contracted by a group called Balmoral, company Balmoral, South African, whose holding company, American company, was Aircraft Charter Solutions, Balmoral Central Contracts.
Right.
It was all South Africans, mainly South Africans. We had MI8 helicopters, and then also Beechcraft 1900s and things like that. So I flew for them on the MI8s. We stayed in a house in Kabul. We had sort of three big houses together. Ended up with 4, and that was our little compound, security compound. And I think at any one time there were about 50 or 60 guys there, pilots and ground crew and stuff like that. Very well organized. Balmoral or ACS was a very good company to work for. They really looked after us. So he was the boss. And good, nice, really good company to work for. And we always just flying for USAID, USAID, and the MI8's doing, ferrying United Nations or whatever United Nations military personnel, mainly men civilians, the civilian contractors, and then food. We never really sort of flew ammunition, but I think on one or two occasions, we did fly ammunition, but our task was mainly food and personnel.
And did you get into any trouble there?
I got shot at once or twice. It wasn't that bad because, we normally flew quite high. But one time I remember rounds coming past, so we just upped our flight level about 500 feet, so it's fairly safe. Another time I'd landed in one of their camps. They had these big high walls around the camp, and on them to approach, I saw some guys walking. And, they just look suspicious. It's just the way they're walking and the way they're looking, they look suspicious. And anyway, after I landed on the wall, just as we touched down and we were sort of opening up the doors to let the packs out, there was an explosion, about sort of 30 or 30 meters away. So what had happened is that these guys, they were the Taliban, and they were waiting for the helicopter to come past, and they threw a grenade over the wall. But fortunately, the LZ, the helicopter landing site, was about 30, 40 meters away from the edge of the wall. So we were quite safe. The other time I had an engine cut. Well, I had 2 engine cuts there. The one time it was interesting, and the other time was just as I was coming into the harbor. Otherwise, not too much. Yeah.
But on the one occasion, you managed to keep the aircraft flying with just one engine or something. You nearly had to go down.
Yeah, we were flying from Lachman. Lachman was an American base stuck in the mountains, sort of Taliban area. It's quite a heavy Taliban area. It was right in the valleys, and the mountains there go up to, it wasn't part of the Hindu Kush, but they easily go up to 11,000 feet. And Lachman was tucked in the valley, and had to go there to drop people off at Lachman and then fly to Jalalabad. And after takeoff from Lachman on our way to Jalalabad, we had an oil pressure failure, and so I had to shut down the engine. Now, the MI8 is an incredible helicopter, really. It's rugged and strong. So we were sitting at around about 10,000 feet when the engine cut, and probably the all-up weight of the MI8 is 13,000 kilograms, 13 tons. And we were probably around about 11.5 to 12 tons with fuel and the packs and the cargo on board. I couldn't maintain the 10,000 feet. So, keeping speed, I dropped down, and I could maintain height and speed at 8,500 feet. So we went down the valleys, which in a sense was a bit hairy because it was a known Taliban area and we couldn't climb up above the mountain range. So we had to go down in a valley, and the only valley really that was accessible was known to be a Taliban stronghold. But we weren't shot at, well, not that I know of, and managed to put the helicopter down with one engine onto, there wasn't a runway or anything at Jalalabad, well, not where we were. It was a helicopter pad. We were the place we had to land. So put the helicopter down, and that was it, yeah. But I must admit, it was a relief to get on the ground. I have a lot of respect for that MI8.
That was my next question, Neil. Just talk about helicopters in general. Which are the helicopters that you rate, you like to fly? You've flown a lot of different machines. Just tell us a bit about them and the ones that you prefer more than others.
The one with the most fun is the Alouette with the 20mm cannon. There's nothing to beat that. The Alouette on its own is just a toy. The Alouette with a 20mm cannon, you can make a statement. The next one is the Puma, which is a gentleman's aircraft. It's fast, it's rugged, it's fairly rugged, but we flew that in our war. But if you go back to which is the real machine, okay, Mi-24, that's okay, but it's old technology. It's nice to fly. It's quite smooth. It's not suited for African conditions. That's my opinion. People don't agree with me, but for Africa warfare, it's not suited. But if you want a real helicopter for fighting wars, unconventional war, or operating in Africa, there's nothing to touch it.
Really?
It's rugged.
Yeah.
It's just simple. It's rugged, simple. It carries a weight, and it's your high altitude, your high density altitude, high operations. There's nothing that can touch anything in that class. It's fantastic. And it's very basic. you know, it's designed, now, I don't want, people mustn't take me wrong. It's designed for people who just cannot do things properly. We just don't have the technical know-how. And I include the Russians. It's okay. Nobody can point fingers. Include the Russians. No. Seriously, it's an amazing airplane. Simple to operate and very strong.
When you're sitting in the cockpit of the Mi-8, what systems are you running? What weapon systems are you dealing with as a pilot?
I never flew a weaponized Mi-8. You can, look, I've seen them. Initially in executive outcomes in the early days of Sierra Leone, before my time, there was an Mi-8 that had rockets and guns on it, but I never flew that. You can put rockets and guns on it, which I don't agree with. You see, the thing is, the Mi-8 is designed as a transport helicopter, cargo carrying troop carrier. And that's its role. The moment used because you've got pilots sitting side by side. So you know, your frontal area is wide. So to me, and it's not like the proper gunships like the Apache, the Mi-24, and the modern gunships, which is you come into attack. It's a small cross section. Whereas the Mi-8 with armed Mi-8 is a large cross section. So to me, I don't think it's a good idea to weaponize an Mi-8. So from asking a question, what have I done from the front? You can put rockets on, you can put guns on, you can even drop bombs. You can put pods on the outside, so you can drop bombs. But I never did it.
In Sierra Leone, you were flying the Mi-24 in those attacks, and on that you're operating the rockets and guns from the cockpit.
Yeah, we had rockets, guns, and we had anti-tank missiles, which we never used. But the fact is, it's quite a spectacular armament you can put on. First of all, you get different versions of the Mi-24. Now, the Mi-24 we had in Sierra Leone had the 4-barrel Gatling gun. Yakba. So 12-7, 4-barrel Gatling gun. You can probably push out around about 4,500 rounds a minute just from that gun of 12-7 rounds. So that's heavy firepower. Then you can mount on the sides. You can put on what they call universal pods. You can put in in each pod. Each pod can take a different types of can be configured differently. The one configuration you can put in a twin 23 millimeter cannon, very potent. Then you have another configuration where you can have the 12-7 Yakba 4-barrel 12-7, and then so that's sitting on top, and then on either side of it, you've got 2 4-barrel 7.62 Gatling guns. So now just out of that one pod, that's what 3 4 12. That's what 13.5. My maths around 13,500 rounds a minute from each pod. You put another pod on the other side, so there's another 13,500 rounds. Then you've got your fun. That thing can push up your head like you cannot believe. All right. Remember one thing: those guns fire 4,000 rounds a minute, 4.5. So you cannot carry 4,500 rounds a minute.
No.
So you've got about 20-second rounds of firing. But you pull that trigger, and you've got say 20,000 rounds coming your way once. Just 1 second burst or 2 second burst. That's a hell of a lot of lead that you've got to dodge.
And the pilot is running all those systems.
Yeah, you had from the front. You had the nose gun, which you can traverse. The front gunner can operate that. That's the 12-7. And then he can do the bombs. All right. So you can also put bombs on the Mi-24, which I never drop bombs. Then from the back seats, from the pilot side, he can override the front gunner and lock the nose gun so that he's got control and he can fire it. Plus, he's got the pods on either side, which he can fire from those guns. And then you can also put on rocket pods. You've got 2 rocket pods. You've got the 18mm S8 rocket pod, which is 80mm rockets. And if I remember correctly, you have 20 rockets or 80mm rockets in each pod. Then you have another pod, which takes a 57mm pod, and I think they're 20, maybe around about 50 rockets in each pod. And that's you're the back pilot. That's your business. You shoot those. And in fact, that's quite an effective weapon. I don't know if I can come into a story about how I used that in Sierra Leone. One day we got a call out when the rebels were advancing on Canada. And I got a call out that the guys are coming down from sometime, I can't remember what it was, and we had actually gone to Canada to Kazavak some Nigerian soldiers. They've been attacked the night before. There are quite a few casualties. And then I was told that the rebels are coming down the road and can we go and do something? We had a full armament, so we put in some fuel and I flew down the road. And then as we're coming down the road, you know, I'm sitting quiet. I'm sort of a couple hundred feet so I could see where I'm going. And there I see there's this crowd coming down the road. Obviously it's the soldiers, but in front of the soldiers on the road is a whole lot of civilians. They were using the civilians as human shields. Now, we didn't really have the equipment in those days to, you know, when you put the rockets on an aircraft, you've got to line those rockets so at a certain distance, the rockets will converge to a point and that you shoot. So you judge the distance, or you get the systems on the aircraft to tell you what the distance is. I've got like the rangefinder, and then you pull the trigger to release the rockets. But now I knew that those rockets, instead of converting onto a spot, they tended to diverge. So I thought, okay, here we go. Now, what do I do about these civilians? I can't shoot at the rebels to take out the rebels because the civilians are there. So I was coming into the dive. I wanted to see what the reaction of the rebels will do. So, of course, the rebels, as soon as they see me coming in, they know what's coming, they all jump into the bush. Now the civilians are sitting there shitting themselves in the road, wondering they're going to get killed. But, of course, I know these rockets are going to go either side. So I pulled the trigger. We killed 70 of the rebels. Not one civilian got killed.
Yes. What a story. Neil, did you have anything to do with Bob McKenzie in West Africa?
Look, I don't really know him. I met him when I was in the Men of Rhodesia days. I met him, but I never got to know him. I know his story about what happened to him and all that sort of thing, but I never met him.
What happened? There are different stories. He was running a training facility and he was working with Gurkhas.
My version, what I'm told, all right, this is my version. He was there before executive outcomes. He had doing training of Gurkhas, and they were also conducting operations. One time they picked up an RUF camp, and he led his Gurkha force and some sort of Sierra Leone troops into the area. I'm just cutting this short, the basis. And they had the contacts, and he got captured. And then, of course, the stories out there what happened.
Yeah. It's a pretty gruesome story, which won't bother to repeat.
You see, sorry, just to go one thing. This is another thing which has been my whole theory. It's not a theory. That's experience. Is you can train anybody to be a fighting force. Doesn't matter where they come from. It can be Africans. It can be black, white, pink. If you haven't got good leadership, they will not be a good fighting force. Now in Africa, and it's been proven time and time again, and I've had the same experience. I've met some damn good soldiers, black soldiers, and all they needed was good leadership. The leadership was poor, and that's why when I go for a contract, I say, look, we will train your guys, we will use your guys, but for the first part of the contract, it must be our people. Our people will go with the guys. We will go into battle with you. We will lead them, and once you've proven yourselves and you know what to do, then we will pull out and you take over. But I don't understand it. And that's why they lose so many people. But there's other factors why they don't want us to be there. I mean, that's another thing. There's all sort of political stuff and business, and they don't want. None of them want to win the war anyway.
Better to let it drag on and sell weapons and.
Look at Mozambique. What's happening in Mozambique now?
I was going to ask you about that. Just what's your take on Cabo Delgado and northern Mozambique?
Cabo Delgado, first of all, okay, let's not talk about the oil and gas, because there could be other political pressures on why that's not running. But there's a lot of trade in illicit trade in drugs, diamonds, poaching, ivory, rhino horns, human trafficking coming out of that area. And of course, and that is run by the government. And now, whether the government's in cahoots with the rebels here, the jihadists, I think there must be some sort of collusion. But UC doesn't want to win that war. He doesn't want that war to win. They're doing business. It's the same in Africa. Same in Sierra Leone. When we had the sort of what is the Nigerian troops? Unimog. When Unimog, I think it was Unimog now.
Yeah,
they were there. Everybody was doing business. They were doing diamonds and stuff. Nobody wanted to win that war. The rebels, Unimog, particularly the Guineans, were giving the rebels ammunition. And the rebels were giving, and I remember one time we even had a fight with the rebels, and they had a Guinean rocket launcher, the DM-21 rocket launcher. We captured it because they're doing business. But the generals are getting dying.
That's why the South Africans' executive outcomes and stuff were too effective and had to be got rid of.
Correct. Yes.
It really is scandalous what is going on and what they get away with. And it's happening. It's happening all the time.
Yeah.
Neil, what's happening in West Africa now, in Mali, and places like that? The Russians are in some control there.
The Russians have taken over control, to the best of my knowledge. The French have been, from my knowledge, French are out. How effective the Russians with using Wagner are, I'm not sure. I have got reports that Wagner are not that effective. The jihadists, ISIS and Janem, they've got control of the north, and they're steadily coming south. Wagner seem to be more ensconced in the towns protecting the politicians. Every now and then we get a report that they go out and they attack, or the military goes out and attack, but they're not that successful. The war is getting closer to Bamako. In fact, this morning we got a report now that we have to start preparing. Okay, I'm far away from Bamako at the moment, but there is now, once again, there are intelligence saying the jihadists are going to conduct some attacks in Bamako very soon. Now, what is very soon, I don't know. We had that a couple of months ago, a couple of weeks ago, nothing happened. What's going to happen now, I don't know. But the jihadists are south of where I am now. And they are attacking people on the roads, they are attacking the military points and stuff like that. So the country is on its way down, I think.
And what are the Russians, what's the motivation for being there?
Mining. They've taken over, they've got a lot of gold mines. I believe there's a big iron ore mine in the south. It's like in Burkina Faso as well. I think Burkina Faso, it's just mining. They're into mining. They've taken control of the countries, because remember one thing, the Chinese and the Russians don't interfere with local politics.
Yeah.
They don't put demands on human rights and democracy and stuff like that. They come in here and they offer the guys a package, weapons and stuff like that in return for mining rights and getting out the raw materials. That's all it is. And that's why they're so successful.
But you think their days are limited? This wave of attacks will result?
No, look, the jihadists are quite strong. They're very good. I mean, the other day they attacked it up in Burkina Faso. I think they wiped out the whole. They attacked a town. They killed a lot of people. They're very active. But I think the Russians, they're protecting their interests.
What air assets have they got there, Neil?
They've got. You don't really see too much. Obviously, the helicopter side, they've got the Mi-8s, the Mi-717s, 117s, 8s. They've got Mi-24s. They're providing the government with quite a lot of weaponry. I believe they've got the Sukhoi 25, 27 ground attack stuff. So there is some fairly sophisticated equipment here. I also hear that they've got helping the government with drones, drone surveillance, reconnaissance, and we had reports that they've deployed an surface-to-air missile system. I haven't got confirmation of that, but apparently there are two systems here. Now, why, I don't know, because there's no air threat. I don't know. I couldn't tell you.
Neil, and Central African Republic, what's happening there? The Russians are also there in quite a big way.
I believe, I haven't got too much information on that, but Bangui to a certain extent is safe, but the rest of the countries, the government's lost control. The Russians, they cannot fight in the African way of fighting. The thing is also the Russians go into a country, and this is what's happening there in Mali, getting away from Central Africa, like this thing. They go into the areas and they're useless. There's no such thing as hearts and minds or collateral damage or stuff like that. They don't worry about that. They go in there, and if there are any terrorists in the village, they'll wipe out that whole village. They don't care. At least during the Rhodesian War and our war, I'm digressing a little bit, we'd surround the village where there'd be terrorists in the village, and we know there's civilians. And then we'd surround the village and get the Telstar up broadcasting messages that everybody must leave the area. You give them the time to leave the area, and then they've got to go through a certain gate. Everybody gets searched, and if they're terrorists, they get arrested. And after that, after the time is up, then whoever's in the village must be a terrorist. But these guys don't do that. They don't wipe out whole villages. They don't care.
Oh no, Neil. A few years ago, I had quite a prominent academic / historian wanting to do a book on the Rhodesian War, and she couldn't believe it when I told her, I've done quite a lot of research into what happened, and I spent a bit of time as a soldier there, and I really don't know of any atrocities that were committed. If they were very well hidden, and she just couldn't get her head around it. She said, "But look, even in America, the Americans wiped out villages and stuff." And I said, "Well, I know about My Lai, and I'm sure there were other events similar to that, but I just don't believe that happened in Rhodesia." She found it very difficult to believe.
I remember one contact in Rhodesia. We attacked a village, and the tours were running around in dresses, which they did. And I remember one person in a dress was running away, and we shot, and it turned out to be a local woman. There was a major reaction to that. The ground commander in charge of the fire force, he really got into shit. We got into shit for doing that. And we were warned that just be careful, don't do this. The Rhodesians are very strict on it. And same as South Africa. We also had to look after ourselves. But I think it's not to go out there and just kill civilians indiscriminately. Obviously, civilians did get killed, yes.
But it was kept to a minimum.
Yeah.
Well, Neil, it's been another fascinating hour and a bit talking to you. I know Al Venter wrote up your story, but I think there's another book there. But just thank you very, very much indeed. It's been fascinating, and stay safe, and looking forward to your return to the southern tip, and we can have a beer.
Well, I've decided that first of all, I'm going to wait until the weather is warm, so it's not so cold. And I don't think I would face load shedding, so I'll wait until there's no more load shedding. Never.
No, wait for the sun to come out and then get back here.
I'll try. Okay, I understand.
Thanks a hell of a lot, Neil. Really appreciate it. Cheers, buddy. Stay safe.
Same there. Bye-bye.